start today. Joining me now is Ann Gearin, White House correspondent for the Washington Post, and Asted Herndon, national political reporter for the New York Times. Asted, a year ago when we saw what happened in Charlottesville and the killing of Heather Heyer by allegedly by white supremacist who was there defending the stature of Confederate generals and racists, and the counter-protesters saying we have no place in that in society. The President of the United States came out and said what many of us, including me, felt was establishing a moral equivalency between the neo-Nazis, Confederate sympathizers, and the anti-Confederate protesters. Last night, he said, I'm against all racism, I'm against all violence, still not really condemning white supremacy in its own form, which was what this is and was about a year ago. How do you assess what the president has said now? Has he made any progress in a year? And in light of all that he's done in a year, does it really mean anything that he says anything at this point?
Mm-hmm. This is a unique situation with this president because you often have these moments of controlled statements in which he'll say the quote-unquote right thing. But we know that this is a president who really thrives in those moments where he says things off the cuff, where he says his true feelings, and he says it in a way that we know what is the more passionate or authentic version of himself. It's very easy to know the times in which he's reading off a script. And we had this even last year at this time. I mean, but we all remember the equivalency you're talking about with the very fine people on both sides. But there was also a moment in which he read off a script and condemned racism and violence in between those kind of more inflammatory statements. And so it's easy to kind of look at these and wonder if this is really the president's feelings, if this is really what is a true reflection of this White House's thoughts on the issue when you have moments in which he seems to come out so forcefully and do really work for these folks. Sure. And so when if you look at the statement yesterday, it says all types of racism and violence. And if you talk to any person who studies race and politics or white identity politics or white nationalists, they'll tell you that that's not going to be a statement that really upsets those folks. They think that...
And that was my point, Andy, right. That he didn't say white supremacy. He didn't say white nationalism. His daughter did in a tweet, but he didn't. So he left it almost where it was like there is all kind of racism. But we're not talking about all kind. We're talking about the white nationalist, neo-Nazi, Confederate kind of support that we're seeing here in Charlottesville, that he made a moral equivalency a year ago, and he really hasn't really directly, in my opinion, come back at it. And, you know, and complete transparency, I've been one that has been protesting the president for decades now, from the Central Park 5 case that he called for the death penalty. But this last week, he's attacked LeBron James, he's attacked NFL protesters, he stood up against all of those of us that have stood for causes of racial and social justice. And then he says, I'm against all racism, all violence, and I'm going to go play golf. And
yeah, well, it's been quite a week. The president's here at his golf club in Bedminster, and we the press corps have seen him every day or two. But in between the times that we see him and we really know whether he's playing golf or not, he's certainly been busy on Twitter with, as you point out, a number of racially tinged tweets and attacks certainly on LeBron James and CNN anchor Don Lemon and NFL players in particular. I'm struck by something that Asted said on that what the tweet yesterday wasn't really fully a denunciation of the white supremacist movement or of racism the way we usually think of it. And I think that is, as you say, he hasn't quite drawn a line that's really much different than what he drew last year. The tweet yesterday clearly was an attempt to do so. It was his first comment at all on the then approaching anniversary of Charlottesville. And I think it's also notable that neither he nor people close to him have had anything really at all to say about the protest that's supposed to take place across the street from the White House this afternoon, the second Unite the Right rally.
Let me put back up the tweet and Mr. Herndon, if you look at what he said, the riots in Charlottesville a year ago. First of all, it was not riots, it was people protesting to stand for the Confederates. When the counter-protesters came, they turned it into a riotous situation. It wasn't like some uprising from the people of Charlottesville. And he says, come together, we condemn all types of racism and acts of violence, not again specifically dealing with what actually happened a year ago. I think it is a cheap way of trying to deal with a very serious mark during the first year of his administration. And I think it falls far short of him addressing one way or another what happened here in Virginia a year ago. And I think that we've got to call it like we see it. He's still trying to hedge his bet with a lot of these white nationalist groups, Mr. Herndon.
Yeah. And if you talk to those folks, which I have, they have really co-opted the term racism. They will say that racism exists, and they'll surely agree, but they'll say that the white people are the aggrieved party, that, it is racism that white people experience that's really the problem, the moral issue in the country. And so when they see a tweet like that, I was actually looking, I saw that tweet and I looked over some white nationalist sites just to see what the reaction is. And when folks see a tweet like that, they think the president is on their side. They think the president is speaking their language. And so whether, even in the rosiest view of President Trump's intentions, that you still have him, as he has done for the last year and a half, parroting the language of folks who traffic in hate. And so when you don't do those clear denunciations and they're ambiguous, it leaves room for this type of interpretation.
You have, and this afternoon, a scheduled white civil rights rally, what they're calling it, by white nationalists in front of the White House where the president lives. And as you stated, he has not addressed that. There will be counter-protests by some 40-odd groups that are protesting their stand for white nationalism. I think that it is very clear that this president clearly does not want to very clearly and emphatically sever his ties or any way connected, even symbolically, with those that have propagated this kind of ideology and political kind of thought in this country.
Well, I don't know what the president's real intention is here, but certainly just looking on the face of it, he hasn't condemned this rally, which is taking place directly across the street from the house where he would be if he wasn't here on vacation. That much is very plain. But it also, I think, is worth pointing out that over the course of the last year, in which Charlottesville was considered really a watershed moment, if you remember, there were staff who were considering resigning. There were, Republican members of Congress looking green about the gills. It was a very difficult political moment for people who, if not full-on supporters of the president, at least wanted to be supporters of his political party and agenda. And over the course of that year, we've seen the president dip a toe, a foot, or more into racial politics, and always on the side of well, white folks have it rough too, if only by extension. Remember that his political base is overwhelmingly white, overwhelmingly male, and overwhelmingly older.
I wonder why.
And many of the things we see him do.
There's no guess there.
Yeah.
Well,
right.
I'm going to leave it there. Thank you, Ann.
He's talking to them to a degree. Thank you.
He's talking to them, and he's usually talking about us. But thank you very much, Ann. Thank you very much, Ested Herndon. Coming up, God bless white America. That's a quote from a great movie out this week by director Spike Lee, who is still doing the right thing. We'll talk to him in just a few minutes. But up next, a year since white supremacists took to the streets of Charlottesville, Virginia, we go back to examine, has anything changed in American race relations? This is Politics Nation. Be right back.